Hello again, friends, and the happiest of New Year's to you. Sometimes the future can be a little scary. No one knows what the future will bring, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes the future is like a wonderful gift just waiting to be opened. Of course, sometimes you open it and, it's a Jumanji game, but still, we are going to start the new year with a fairy tale from Norway. I found the name and just couldn't resist, so join me now as we read Tatterhood. Once upon a time, there was a king and a queen who had no children, and that made the queen very sad. She seldom had a happy hour. She was always crying and complaining and saying how dull and lonesome it was in the palace, which could be one of the reasons she doesn't have children. Sounds like a joy to be around. If we had children, there would be life enough, she said. Whenever she went in all her realm, she found God's blessing in children, even in the poorest hut. And whenever she went, she heard women scolding their children and saying how they had done this and that wrong. The queen heard all this and thought it would be so nice to do as the other women did. At last the king and queen took into their palace an adopted girl to raise, that they might always have her with them, to love her if she did well, and to scold her if she did wrong, like their own child. Great! Conditional love. That won't mess up the psyche of an adopted child. I'm sure this will be a wonderful story. One day, the little girl, whom they had taken as their own, ran down into the palace yard and was playing with a golden apple. Just then an old beggar woman came by, who had a little girl with her, and it wasn't long before the little girl and the beggar's child were great friends, and began to play together and to toss the golden apple between them. When the queen saw this, as she sat at a window in the palace, she tapped on the pane for her foster daughter to come up. She went at once, but the beggar's girl went up too, and as they went into the queen's apartment, each held the other by the hand. "Oh, this is so incredibly sweet! I hope no one says anything to ruin this wonderful moment." The queen began to scold the little lady and say, "You ought to be above running about and playing with a tattered beggar's brat," and she started to drive the girl down the stairs. And the moment's ruined. "If the queen only knew my mother's power, she'd not drive me out," said the little girl, and when the queen asked what she meant more plainly, "Oh, goody! We're playing the pronoun game. Fine, let's name people. We'll call the queen Mindy, and the foster daughter Cindy, and the poor child Lindy." So Lindy told Mindy how Lindy's mother could get Mindy children if Lindy's mother chose. See how much clearer that was? Well, that's an uncomfortable sentence. How is Lindy's mother getting Mindy children of her own? The queen wouldn't believe it, but Lindy insisted and said that every word of it was true, and asked the queen only to try and make her mother do it. So the queen sent the girl down to fetch her mother. "Do you know what your daughter says?" asked the queen of the old woman, as soon as ever she came into the room. No, the beggar woman knew nothing about it. "Well, she says, 'You can get me children if you will,'" answered the queen. "Queens shouldn't listen to beggar girls' silly stories," said the old woman, and walked out of the room. That's actually a good point, really. Then the queen got angry and wanted again to drive out the little girl, but Lindy declared it was true, every word, and that she had said, "Let the queen only give my mother something to drink," said the girl. "When she gets tipsy, she'll soon find out a way to help you." The queen was ready to try this, so the beggar woman was fetched up again, and treated with as much wine and mead as she wanted, and so it was not long before her tongue began to wag. Then the queen came out again with the same question she had asked before. "Perhaps I know one way to help you," said the beggar woman. "Your Majesty must make them bring in 2 pails of water some evening before you go to bed. Wash yourself in each of them, and afterwards throw the water under your bed. When you look under your bed the next morning, 2 flowers will have sprung up, a beautiful one and an ugly one. Eat the beautiful one, but leave the ugly one alone. Be careful not to forget this last bit of advice." That was what the beggar woman said. I need to go have a conversation with my biology teacher. Yes, the queen did what the beggar woman advised her to do. She had the water brought up in 2 pails, washed herself in them, and emptied them under the bed. And when Cindy looked under the bed the next morning, there stood 2 flowers. One was ugly and foul, and had black leaves, but the other was so bright and fair and lovely, she had never seen anything like it. So she ate it up at once. But the pretty flower tasted so sweet that Cindy couldn't help herself. She ate the other one too, for she thought, "I'm sure that it can't hurt or help me much either way." Sure, that's why the other woman brought it up, even while drunk, because it's such an unimportant detail. Well, sure enough, after a while, the king was brought to bed. First of all, she had a girl who had a wooden spoon in her hand and rode upon a goat. She was disgusting and ugly, and the very moment she came into the world, she bawled out, "Mama!" Oh, that's impressive. It's a baby genius, or, kill it with fire. One of the two. Also, do we want to talk about the goat? "If I'm your mamma," said the queen, "God give me grace to mend my ways." "Oh, don't be sorry," said the girl on the goat, "for one will soon come after me who is better looking." Look who's talking indeed. I guess I can be happy it wasn't the goat. After a while, the queen had another girl who was so beautiful and sweet that no one had ever set eyes on such a lovely child. You may be sure that the queen was very well pleased. The elder twin they called Tatterhood, because she was always so ugly and ragged, and because she had a hood which hung about her ears in tatters. Was she born with the hood? Because if not, this is sort of, the queen's fault. The queen could hardly bear to look at her. The nurses tried to shut her up in a room by herself, but it did no good. She always had to be where the younger twin was, and no one could ever keep them apart. Well, clearly Tatterhood's sister loves her, but I must ask, Cindy and Lindy just asked the story never to be heard from again? I mean, are they hanging out with Snow White's father in the I'm no longer important to the story department? One Christmas Eve, when they were half grown up, there arose frightful noises and clatter in the hallway outside the queen's apartment. Tatterhood asked what it was that was making such a noise outside. "Oh," said the queen, "it's not worth asking about." But Tatterhood wouldn't give up until she found out all about it, and so the queen told her it was a pack of trolls and witches who had come there to celebrate Christmas. Is this a normal thing around there? So, Tatterhood said that she would just go out and drive them away, in spite of all they could say, and however much they begged her and asked her to leave the trolls alone, she just had to go out and drive the witches off. She begged the queen to be careful and keep all the doors shut tight so that not one of them would open the least bit. Having said this, off she went with her wooden spoon and began to hunt out and drive away the hags. All the while there was such a commotion out in the gallery, the like of which had never been heard. The whole palace creaked and groaned as if every joint and beam were going to be torn out of its place. Now I can't say exactly what happened, but somehow or other, one door did open a little bit, and her twin sister just peeped out to see how things were going with Tatterhood, and put her head a tiny bit through the opening. But, pop! Up came an old witch and whipped off her head and stuck a calf's head on her shoulders instead, and so the princess ran back into the room on all fours and began to moo like a calf. What is going on here? Does everybody know you can just replace a head like that?
Get them!
Hey, I've been turned into a cow. Can I go home?
You're excused. Anyone else?
No, we're good. We're good.
Get them!
When Tatterhood came back and saw her sister, she scolded them all and was very angry because they hadn't kept better watch, and asked them what they thought of their carelessness now that her sister had been turned into a calf.
I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed.
Oh, come on. Everyone knows that's worse.
But I'll see if I can set her free, she said. Then she asked the king for a ship with a full set of sails and a good load of stores. But she would not have a captain or any sailors. No, she would sail away with her sister all alone. There was no holding her back, and at last they let her have her own way.
Stop, don't come back.
Tatterhood sailed off and steered her ship right up to the land where the witches lived. When she came to the landing place, she told her sister to stay quite still on board the ship, but she herself rode on her goat up to the witch's castle. When she got there, one of the windows in the gallery was open, and there she saw her sister's head hung up on the window frame. So she jumped her goat through the window into the gallery, snapped up the head, and set off with it. The witches came after her to try to get the head back. They flocked around her as thick as a swarm of bees or a nest of ants. The goat snorted and puffed and butted with his horns, and Tatterhood beat and banged them about with her wooden spoon, and so the pack of witches had to give up. Is it just me, or do people give up super easily in this story? So Tatterhood got back to her ship, took the calf's head off her sister, and put her own head on again, and then she became a girl as she had ever been before. After that, she sailed a long, long way to a strange king's realm. Shouldn't that be they sailed a long, long way? Now the king of this land was a widower, and he had an only son. When he saw the strange sail, he sent messengers down to the beach to find out where it came from and who owned it. But when the king's men came down there, the only person they saw on board was Tatterhood. And there she was, riding around and around the deck on her goat at full speed until her strands of hair streamed in the winds. What is going on with this story? It's so random. Who wrote this?
Random House.
Clearly.
The men from the palace were all amazed at the sight and asked if more people were not on board. Yes, there were. She had a sister with her, said Tatterhood. They wanted to see too, but Tatterhood said no. No one shall see her unless the king comes himself, she said. And so she began to gallop about on her goat until the deck thundered again. When the servants got back to the palace and told what they had seen and heard down at the ship, the king wanted to set out at once to see the girl that rode on the goat. Slow news day, huh? Girl rides a goat. News at 11. When he arrived there, Tatterhood brought out her sister, and she was so beautiful and gentle that the king immediately fell head over heels in love with her. No, he did not. I will agree to infatuation, but not love. Why do fairy tales always get this wrong?
You can't marry a man you just met.
He brought them both back with him to the palace and wanted to have the sister for his queen. But Tatterhood said no. The king couldn't have her in any way, unless the king's son would take Tatterhood. That, as you may guess, the prince did not want to do at all because Tatterhood was such an ugly hussy. Wait, when did she become a hussy? This story is making my head hurt. However, at last the king and all the others in the palace talked him into it, and he gave in, promising to take her for his queen. But it went sore against his grain, and he was a very sad man. Don't worry, maybe she'll grow on you, like mold. Now they began making preparations for the wedding, both with brewing and baking, and when all was ready they went to the church. The prince thought it was the worst church service he had ever been to in all his life. The king left first with his bride, and she was so lovely and grand. All the people stopped to look at her along the road, and they stared at her until she was out of sight. After them came the prince on horseback by the side of Tatterhood, who trotted along on her goat with her wooden spoon in her fist. To look at him, he was not going to a wedding, but to a burial, and his own at that. He seemed so sad, and did not speak a word. This is just going to be a joyful union. I can just tell.
And let me guess, you have a great personality.
Why don't you talk? Asked Tatterhood, when they had ridden a bit. Why? What should I talk about? Answered the prince. Well, you might at least ask me why I ride upon this ugly goat, said Tatterhood. Why do you ride on that ugly goat? Asked the prince. Is it an ugly goat? Why, it's the most beautiful horse that a bride ever rode, answered Tatterhood, and in an instant the goat became a horse, the finest that the prince had ever seen. I feel like I would suddenly have a lot to talk about now. They rode on a bit further, but the prince was just as sad as before, and couldn't say a word. So Tatterhood asked him again why he didn't talk, and when the prince answered he didn't know what to talk about, she said, Well, you can ask me why I ride with this ugly spoon in my fist. Why do you ride with that ugly spoon? Asked the prince. Is it an ugly spoon? Why, it's the loveliest silver fan that a bride ever carried, said Tatterhood, and in an instant it became a silver fan so bright that it glistened. Can I ask you why I don't have $1 million, or does the magic not work like that? They rode a little way further, but the prince was still just as sad and did not say a word. In a little while, Tatterhood asked him again why he didn't talk, and told him to ask why she wore the ugly gray hood on her head. Why do you wear the ugly gray hood on your head? Asked the prince. Is it an ugly gray hood? Why, it's the brightest golden crown that a bride ever wore, answered Tatterhood, and it became a crown at once. All right, how shallow is this prince? Also, can she pull a rabbit out of a hat? Hey, does she do children's parties? Now they rode a long way further, and the prince was so sad that he sat without making a sound or uttering a word, just as before. This man is an idiot! I would be beside myself with joy! My brilliant wife! Look at how amazing she is! So his bride asked him again why he didn't talk, and told him to ask now why her face was so ugly and gray. Yeah. Now we get to the heart of this matter. Yes, asked the prince, why is your face so ugly and gray? I officially do not like him. Am I ugly? You think my sister beautiful, but I am 10 times more beautiful, said the bride. And when the prince looked at her, she was so beautiful. He thought that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. After that, it was no wonder that the prince found his tongue, and no longer rode along with his head hanging down. Yes, because he has no concept that a person's true value is within, not without. Tatterhood would be better off finding someone with a brain. I wonder if Ricky with the Tuft is available. So they drank the bridal cup both deep and long, and after that both prince and king set out with their brides to the princess's palace, and there they had another bridal feast, and drank once more both deep and long. There was no end to the celebration. Now run quickly to the king's palace, and there will still be a drop of the bridal ale left for you. Yeah, perhaps if I drink enough, I will forget the putz the prince is. Also, what the heck happened to the first 2 girls, Cindy and Lindy? And we just stopped caring about them after the princess, too beautiful to name, and Tatterhood, and... What is up with this story? While I'm at it, how did anyone at home recognize Tatterhood? Were they like, "Hey, beautiful daughter, you're home. Where's your hideous sister?" What is the point of this story? Well, it's that time where I ask you to please like, share, and subscribe. You all make the new year so special. Remember the notification. Like the Alamo, or the 5th of November, or the Titans. Although it's a bit weird remembering mythical monsters, but, whatever. I would like to thank Pixabay.com and their amazing contributors for everything. I think my channel would be very boring without them. If you would like to support me on Patreon, Instagram, or Facebook, there are links in the description below. I would like to thank you, my wonderful friends, for being here with me and listening to all the weird and wonderful fairy tales I can find. I am nothing without you. And now for a special thank you to my Patreon friends.